Okay, welcome everybody to the final colloquium of the year. I'm very pleased to go out on a high note with our guest today, who is Shigehiro Oishi from the psychology department. And Shige is the Marshall Field 4 professor of psychology. I don't know if that means there's 3 others, but Marshall Field 4 professor of psychology here at the University of Chicago. And before coming here, he taught at the University of Minnesota, Columbia, University of Virginia. He's won many awards. Just to list a few, he won the 2017 Society of Experimental Social Psychology Career Award, the 2018 Carol and Ed Diner Mid-Career Award, and the Society for Personality and Social Psychology, from the Society for Personality and Social Psychology, and also the 2021 Outstanding Achievement Award for advancing cultural psychology. So many such career awards. His research is on culture, social ecology, and well-being, which we'll learn more about today. And he is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So we're very pleased to have you here today, Shige, and the floor and screen are yours.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here, and you might be wondering why psychologist is presenting in this forum. And actually, I was feeling exactly the same way when I talking here. But the reason is Chris, of course. So I didn't know much about Mansueto Institute, so let's look at the website. I really like that Mansueto is really trying to think about cities and think about what makes cities successful. So today's talk, I would like to invite you to think about what are the successful cities? And you can think about, of course, economically thriving cities. But I think one way to think about successful city is perhaps in that city, children who are born into maybe relatively poor household have a fair chance of moving up. And maybe not so successful city are the cities where only the children of moving up the economic ladder. Okay, so today's talk, socio-ecological psychology of upward social mobility. And my lab study culture, social ecology, and well-being. And today's talk will focus on social ecology. And since this is the lunch, so I thought I'll make it as fun as possible. So this is a show with 3 acts. Okay, so Act 1, who moves on up. Act 2, to belong and be oneself. And Act 3 end with who cares? Okay. So Act 1. Let's see whether audio works. If you're old enough. All right. So that's the show about the Jeffersons who moved from Queens to Upper East Side. So that's the American dream, sort of typical upward social mobility. So when we think about who moves on up, psychologists, being psychologists, often think about these factors. For instance, maybe Jeffersons were very smart. So intelligence is important. Maybe they got the skills. And perhaps they had the drives and necessary personalities. So particular focus for typical psychologists studying who moves up is essentially just focus on the individual attributes. On the other hand, what I'm trying to do within psychology is trying to sort of make psychologists also pay attention to socio-ecological factors that probably you guys usually pay attention to. For instance, availability of high quality public education, or how uneven or even the city is, or how much social capital there are in given societies. So this is the focus on the society. And essentially, what we are trying to do is focus on both individual factors as well as societal factors. So my first project really was inspired by this famous studies by Raj Chetty, Harvard economist. And I don't know how, but he got hold of IRS tax returns of entire birth cohort of Americans born in 1980 to 1982. So when they were in teens, so 1996, when they were 14 to 16, Raj Chetty looked at their household income tax return. So they knew exactly where they stood when they were children. And then when they turned 30, they looked at their tax return. So now they knew how much money they are making, whether they moved up to top 20% of the given cohort in terms of income. So you look at the variety of commuting zones within the United States, and land of opportunity is the place where children who are born into bottom 20% of the household, their chance of moving up the economic ladder. So this is a famous figure, so you might be familiar with that. The dark red here are the worst area where there weren't that much opportunities, whereas the lighter area are opportunities. Okay, so they identified 5 factors that differentiate these land of opportunity from lack of land of lack of opportunities. Okay, the first factor, there are 2 promoters of intergenerational social mobility. One is the quality of public education. So children who are born into that area with a good public education, their chance of moving up was higher. Also, social capital, the more social capital the given commuting zone had, the greater chance of upward social mobility. And there are 3 factors that suppressed or depressed the chance of upward social mobility. One was the percentage of African American residents. Okay, the more African American residents, the chance of moving up, the probability of giving kids in the commuter zone going up was lower. Okay? The greater income inequality, the lower the upward social mobility. And the final factor, which was one of the largest predictor, was the percentage of children born into single parents. Obviously, it's very much difficult situations from which you rise. So these 5 are a fairly well-established factor, but when we read this paper, we thought about something else as well. So when you think about kids who are trying to move up economic ladder, who moves up eventually in their 20s, 30s, and 40s? Perhaps the first job is really important. What kind of first job out of high school or not out, but when you are still in high school, you can get. And our thought was that in the cities where you don't need to rely on car, you can walk to the job or you can take public transportation to the work, might be the place where children can actually get a good job and then eventually move up the ladder. So what we did is to get the work score for each of the commuting zone and essentially add that to the multiple regression equation. So for instance, there is a workscore.com and you can type in your own address and then that spit out the number. And work score goes from 0, you cannot get anything done by foot, to 100. You can do pretty much everything, all the daily chore, grocery shopping, banking, library, post office, everything. Okay. Can you guess this address? What's the work score of Mansueto Institute?
60.
60? 80? Yeah. Very good. The the wisdom of crowd, the answer is 70. So if you go up to the 57th Street, like the corner of University and 57, there's a quad club. That would be 81 because that would be a lot closer to the Medici and bookstores and couple of stores. So the walk score is calculated based on essentially how many amenities you can walk. And then each address has the score. And then at the block level, zip code level, city level, you can just take essentially weighted average of that every average. So we did a simple regression. So 41% of the variance in this commuting zone in the upward social mobility can be accounted for by Cherry's big 5 factors. Okay? So you add the walkability to it, and then the R square goes to 0.52. So 11 additional unique percentage explained. Of course, walkable places are different from not so walkable places. Maybe walkable places a little bit richer, maybe more politically liberal. Maybe they don't rely on manufacturing job as much as unwalkable place, maybe more education spending, local government spending, less violent crimes, more progressive state taxation. So a lot of reviewers and ourselves throw out a lot of potential alternative explanations. So we just put everything in the equation. You still see a unique effect of walkability. And of course, that's just a one robustness check. So we wanted to make sure that our walkability finding is robust. So this time we used the propensity score matching, which is essentially trying to divide up all the communities to the walkable communities and not so walkable communities, but then essentially match up in terms of key variables. For instance, population size, urban versus rural. We also matched in terms of the number of historic buildings, because the more historic buildings, usually more pedestrian friendly sort of the city planning that emerge and so forth. So what you see is the walkable city and matched non-walkable city, and as a function in terms of the upward social mobilities. Same data, but these are then matched. So there's a huge outlier here, somehow very upward mobility in the non-walkable, but you see that distributions are quite different. Mean is different. Walkable city tend to be higher in upward social mobility. Okay, so if you just plot the 100 largest city, it looks like this. So the walkable city like New York, San Francisco, Boston, Honolulu tend to have high. So 10%, meaning that among those who were born into bottom 20%, about 10% of them as adult moved up to the top 20%. Right? American average is about 5% probably. You see the Charlotte, North Carolina, Nashville. By the way, these are the places where in the 1990s, the huge job growth happened. So new jobs were there, just that it happened in the suburbs. So unless you had the car, you couldn't get the benefit of the economic growth, essentially. Whereas if you lived in New York, Honolulu, and so forth, even if you didn't have your family didn't have a car, probably you were able to get to the job and able to move up. Chicago, a little bit lower than expected, but still better than Milwaukee. Yeah, about that. Okay, so why walkability is associated with upward social mobility, and what are the psychological mechanisms? And so psychologists, of course, care about that. They don't care about walkability stuff too much, but if you find some association, then what is the psychological explanations? And we thought, in the place where you can walk to the grocery stores and so forth, I think your chance of feeling like you're part of this whole city is much, much, much greater than you're stuck in your neighborhood and rarely being able to go out. So we thought the sense of belonging to the entire city, not just your block or neighborhood, might be really important. So we call this Tracy Chapman hypothesis, partially because, of course, I love Tracy Chapman, but you have to hear her. Okay, so it's right there. Thank you, Tracy Chapman. So we did the additional survey to see if indeed those Americans who live in more walkable city feel greater sense of belonging to the whole city. And indeed, that was the case. And then furthermore, we also found that those people who report greater sense of belonging did indeed achieve upward social mobility compared to their parent socioeconomic status. And we have another study where we ask the belief about upward social mobility, and those people who live in more walkable places tend to believe that they do move up the economic ladder. So that paper was published in 2019. And then 2020, as you know, the COVID happened. So we were thinking about whether there are other potential benefits of walkabilities. And at the time, I lived in New York City. So we looked at the COVID case, confirmed COVID case, as well as confirmed death by zip code area. So there are 174 or so zip code area in New York City. And we looked at the data as of May 22nd, partially because lockdown announcement was made in public on March 22nd. So this was the first 2 months of essentially the COVID, the worst. So you can see on the left is the number of cases per 100,000, darker color meaning more. So the darkest is over 2,000 to 4,000 per 100,000, so a lot. And the B is the confirmed death. So the darker green is the more death per same 100,000. So you see huge death and concentration of the cases there. All right, so we just looked at this is the case and predictor, walkability, median income, percent Asian, percent Black, percent Hispanic. And as additional control, we thought maybe the conservatism who were not essentially wearing masks might affect that cases. Also, life expectancy shows some of the health conditions of the pre-existing condition, as well as the median age. And obviously, it's contagious, so the occupancy per room might also affect the case. So you can look at the top arrow here, walkability. So walkable zip code, fewer cases, more Black and Hispanics, more cases. This was widely reported. And then you just include everything, still walkability effect remains quite strong. And we also corrected for the autospatial correlation as well. That effect remains. But why walkability helped reduce the case? We couldn't quite understand. So what we did is to contact SafeGraph. And SafeGraph is a company that has enormous amount of GIS data. And for each zip code, they have gazillion million points of interest, so they can track how many people are visiting these places. So what we did is look at the geographical mobility in a given zip code 2 weeks before the lockdown and then the 2 weeks after the lockdown. And then we calculate the reduction in geographical mobility. In the walkable area, where you can go to grocery stores, cross the streets, and so forth, you can limit your mobility a lot better than in the way out in Queens or Bronx, where you had to maybe go quite far to get anything. So that was the basic idea. And essentially we found evidence that in the more walkable zip code in New York City, greater degree of reduction before and after the lockdown, the greater reduction in mobility, the fewer COVID cases. And I think this next slide is interesting to you because we plotted the death, essentially how many people died of COVID as a function of median income. So general trend, of course, is that in the richer area, fewer people die compared to a poorer area. But we found a significant interaction with the walkability. So if you just look at the -2, meaning 2 standard deviation below mean in the median income. So these are the poorest neighborhoods in New York City. Way up here is the 1 standard deviation below mean in walkability. So these are the neighborhood, the walk score is like 60s and 65. I mean, New York City is really, average is 87. So 1 standard deviation below is still not completely unwalkable, but that's the type of places. And you see about 400 essentially per 100,000. And equally poor, but the walkable neighborhood, and the numbers are about half, 200 per 100,000. So you see that walkability might be making people safer during the pandemics. Okay. So I'm sure in this room, most of you have read the Jane Jacob, and I love Jane Jacobs as well. And one of the things while doing this project reminded me was her great illustration of sort of the informal social control. So she was waiting a bus in the Lower East Side. She was waiting and waiting, bus didn't come, it was Saturday. And then realized that somebody from the other side of the street on the 3rd floor, woman opened up the window and her, and then said, hey, bus doesn't run here on Saturdays. And then she directed her to the other street. And the story like that, and then she says, this woman is one of thousands and thousands of New Yorkers who take care of the street. Oh, I forgot. This is one of the thousands of people in New York who casually take care of the street. They notice strangers, they observe everything going on. If they need to take action, they do so. So there is a famous butcher shop story next, where the 9-year-old is sort of like struggling with the old man, and the butcher's wife comes up, and then the locksmith comes, and then the 2 guys from the bar come and then surround this guy to confront. And then it turns out this girl was just a daughter of this man, but that's okay, because that's the type of community when maybe the potential kidnapping of child molestation situation happening, just the people are watching the street and then just take care of it. So she says, we don't want police patrolling the street. What we want is the people patrolling, policing, almost unconsciously the street. That's the successful street, and that's the successful city with that sort of informal social control. So we thought maybe that this informal social control is really important. And when you think about it, the 311 call is something like that, because you can just call 311 to report noise in the neighborhood, pothole, or during the COVID, the social distance violations and so forth. So essentially, my graduate student, Yeonjae Cha, looked into 311 call, and there are 25 million of them since 2010. And they have the category, so you can essentially calculate what percentage of the call was related to the social distancing order. And what we found is that in the walkable zip code, there were greater percentage of the social distancing call compared to not so walkable places. And interestingly, residential noise complaints, there was no correlation. So it wasn't that they were calling for everything. I think the residential noise is probably a little bit more self-concern rather than the other concerns. The social distancing is when you notice somebody's partying, obviously it's about the community, not about you per se. So we think this is kind of interesting data. And now we are trying to dig deeper into the psychology of living in a walkable place. So we have relatively new data from 104 large cities, and walkable cities are, as you know, New York, San Francisco, Boston, Chicago, Jersey City. Some of the least walkable cities are the Chesapeake, Winston-Salem, Jacksonville, Florida, Montgomery, Alabama, so forth. And so far, we are finding that those who live in the walkable city tend to engage in more civic activities. They vote more, they participate in the community activities, they discuss political issues with the others and things like that. And also, psychologically speaking, they have greater sense of shared reality, which is essentially the neighbors and I see the world in the similar way, which I think helps to engage, promote the pro-social behavior. Okay, so the first part of the book, what makes the city successful, essentially, we think that the city that is the land of opportunity, that has the greater upward social mobility, is the city, the successful city. And what makes them more successful? Above and beyond the 5 factors identified by the Chetty, I think the walkability is another important factors that could make the city more successful. Okay, what are we doing in terms of time? Okay, all right, so Act 2, belong and be oneself. So in psychology, need to belong is a very, very important concept. When Baumeister and Leary published this paper in 1995, you know, a lot of people say, oh, yeah, of course. But 20 years later, almost 30 years later, this paper has been cited over 300,000 times. It's just insane, but it is really important for us to feel that we belong. And the question then is, yes, walkability is great because that tends to make you feel belong, but what if you still don't feel like you belong? What happened? What people do? I think people, of course, when they have opportunities, they move away. So back in 2014, my student Matt Motow and collaborators thought about this issue of ideological misfit. So we had the opportunity to look at the data, over 1 million who visited essentially moral.org. John Haidt and others created this website. But anyway, so they had to report the zip code where they grew up and the zip code where they live now. And we had the information about their political orientation. So we were able to calculate the zip code where participants grew up, how conservative or liberal was that place based on essentially the percentage of vote to McCain versus Obama. And because we had that individual political orientation, we were able to essentially calculate what's the chance, likelihood that this person moved away from the zip code where they grew up. Okay. And what's the relationship with the surrounding neighborhood political climate. So this is the situations where you are liberal, but you live in essentially deep conservative area. And chance of this person moved away is over 60%. On the other hand, if you are liberal in very liberal area, then the chance of you have moved is like 47%. So quite a bit of difference. The same thing can be said if you are conservative in New York City or DC or place like that, and you're much more likely to have moved like about 60% than if you're conservative who grew up in conservative area. In the follow-up studies, so that's one of the reasons why we think the political polarization happens, because if you feel like you're misfit, you don't belong to there, then you move to the places where your political orientation align with the neighbors. Okay, and in the second study, we explicitly asked their perception of ideological misfit and desire to move. And also we measured how much they feel the sense of belonging to their current cities and neighborhood. And those who perceive misfit, less sense of belonging, and less sense of belonging, the greater desire to move. So certainly sense of belonging was key. I think politics is pretty big factors when you notice that you don't fit in, but there are many other factors, I think, that are not so conscious. So for instance, I do personality research, so I often think about personality. So what about personality? Recently, we have an area called personality and geography. So imagine this was a personality test. You're taking this test, and how would you answer? I am someone who is curious about many different things. How many of you in those? Okay. Inventive, find clever ways to do things. Fascinated by art, music, or literature. Usually, right, academics are really the highest really in this one of the big 5 dimensions of personality. So openness to experiences. Right? So essentially, you can ask the same questions about the geography of politics. This time, instead of politics, you can ask openness to experiences. Where do open people live? And this is not my study, but Marcus Jokala and others did with the collaboration with BBC. So they were able to get the huge data from greater London area. So 56,000 respondents, over 216 postal codes. So this is the map of London. And this is the center of London. And the dark red is the really high in openness experiences. The color get lighter and lighter, and then less and less open. And this dark blue are the least, the lowest. So those people who say, no, I'm not interested in art, music, things like that. Middle of the city looks like that. And in the suburb, it looks like that. And I don't think people are consciously using, oh, I'm an open person, so I wouldn't go there or go that. But if you look at the map of the personality, that's almost exactly what's happening. And interesting, so this is 2015 paper, so data collected 2013, 14. this is the election in London. It's confusing, but the red is actually the Labour Party, so Liberal Party, and then blue is the Conservative Party. And here, just the same map, I'm just showing. And then the dark red high open area, of course, Labour Party. The peripheral area, much more conservative. All right. So we did our own sort of little fun study. So imagine, right, the summer is about to be here. What kind of vacation you want to go? How many of you want to have beach vacation? How many of you want to have mountain vacation? So tell me, how many of you ocean? How many of you mountain? So another thing I found is that in academia, there are way more mountain people than out there. So for instance, I asked 921 University of Virginia students, and 73% of them prefer ocean, and 27% of them prefer mountain. So who cares, right? I know. But what's interesting is that when you look at the personality difference of those mountain lover versus ocean lover, they are not different in terms of neuroticism. They are not different in terms of openness, agreeableness, or conscientiousness, but they are quite different in terms of extroversion. So I thought, oh, that's kind of cute, but so what? Right? And then we thought, yeah, so what? But then we thought, oh, there is the map of US state in terms of personality. So what if we looked at the mountain, how mountainous the state is and state personality? So we looked at the highest mountain and the personality traits. So these data come from Brentford, 2008. X-axis is the extroversion standardized score, and y-axis is the highest mountain. So you see this correlation of -0.4. So people who live in Alaska, state of Washington, Montana, Idaho, these are a lot lower in extroversion. So these are introverts. And people who live in the plain, so North Dakota, look, like 3 standard deviation above me. That's crazy, extroverts. North Dakota, who are they talking to? I don't know. Dakota, DC. Of course, this is just the highest mountain. So we looked at the number of mountains as well. And essentially you find exactly the same thing. And obviously we control for the population density or size or median income or average temperature or rainfall or sunny days and everything, but that relationship is there. So we thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. But does the mountain make you introvert? Or just the introverts just go to the mountain? So we wanted to know, and as a psychologist, we always want to do some experiments. So we did a small experiment at the campus of University of Virginia. So we invited the participants to my lab and randomly assigned into one of the 3 areas, very sloped, wooded area of campus, or a flat area, or the control condition is the dark research lab, psychology building. Okay, so the procedure goes like this. They come to my dark lab room, and then they do the first discussion. How can we improve cafeteria, for instance? And then experimenter is counting who is talking. So observed behavioral extroversion as well as self-report. And then we randomly assign and then bring it to one of the 3 locations. And then we give the second discussion task. And then unobtrusively, the experimenter is counting how many times each participant is speaking and also getting the self-report afterwards. Okay, so this was a lot of work. Okay, did geography change personality? How many of you think it did? I thought so too. This was amazing. 0, like a T-score of 0. Self-report, observer report, nothing worked. Okay. So we were kind of sad after spending the whole year, like controlling for temperatures and weathers and everything. It's really tedious work. But luckily, we asked afterward, how happy do you feel right now? So idea is that extroverts, if they are drawn to open air, and introvert, if they are drawn to secluded area, shouldn't they be happier when they were randomly assigned into their sort of preferred matched location? And essentially that's what we found. Among those who are randomly assigned to the open area, the more extroverted they were, the happier they reported. So in other words, these introverts who were brought into the open area did not feel very happy. Okay. This is a control condition, which was the 0.2 correlation. And wooded area, we see not significant, but if anything, negative correlation. So introverts tended to be happier, extroverts not so much. And crucially, the size of correlation was statistically different. So it seems that in general, people are attracted to the area where essentially they feel comfortable. And that area for extrovert is wide open area. Maybe ocean is great because you have random interactions where you can see, whereas I like to go to mountain because I want to get away from everybody, hide. Okay, so one more study. I like behavioral ecology. They do crazy stuff, right? Like they catch the fish and then put the GIS and then let them swim for a while and then study where they went. And I thought, why don't we do that with undergraduate students? So that we know what kind of space people like to go. So we invited participants to come to beautiful Rotunda area, and they fill out one-page base measure of their mood and things like that. And then we said, you know what? This is your lucky day. You get the full 1 hour research credit by just doing nothing. You do whatever you want. Next 45 minutes, you can go anywhere, but we'll text you 5 minutes, after 40 minutes so that you will be able to come back here in 45 minutes. So we just send them off. But then make sure that you take photo and then give us the photo where you spend most time, okay? And then they come back. I think everybody except one, I think, came back successfully and then completed the time to measure. So where did they go? Some people go to a place like this, library, but very secluded part of the library. Some people go to a little more open part of the library. So the coder just coded how open it is, and also how much sort of exciting and social engagement opportunity there is in the picture. So this one is open and more exciting for social engagement opportunity places. And when we coded the photo in terms of secludedness and excitingness, essentially there was negative correlation between extroversion and secludedness, namely extrovert went to non-secluded area, introvert, of course, went to the secluded area, extroverts went to more exciting area, introvert avoided the exciting area. And furthermore, we measure happiness at time 1, happiness at time 2, so we were able to see the change in their happiness before and after. And x-axis here is the openness. So this side is a wide open area. This side is the not so open area. And we plot it. So 1 standard deviation above the mean for extroverts, more open area they went, the happier they felt. The 1 standard deviation below mean, namely the introverts, tended to be happier in the secluded area than the open area. So the final study in this series was that we identified 32 essentially very popular spot for undergraduate within the campus. Some are central and open areas, some are really remote wooded area. And essentially we just handed out to the people who are just hanging out in respective location, and then got the personality of the person who is hanging out in the center of the campus versus in a secluded area. So the 32 location looks like this, and then this is the central area. That's rotunda and open area, and these are the wooded area of campus and far away from the central part of campus. And as you can imagine, the people who are hanging out in the open area, much more extroverted, and the distance was negatively correlated with the extroversion, namely the extrovert hung out in the central part of the campus. Introverts tended to hang out in the peripheral. All right, so the act 2, to belong and to be oneself. So obviously you have to know yourself. Aristotle said it right? Knowing yourself is the beginning of wisdom, but also you have to know the geography and what kind of potential places there are. Going back to this original question of what makes the city successful in light of our findings, I think is that the city, or this case, park, Central Park, is amazing and successful park. Why? Because it is for everybody. Extroverts can go to the meadow, introvert like me can go to the wooded fall, and if you like water, you can go there. If you like softball, you can play softball, and if you're a kid, there is a playground. So I think the successful cities are the cities that really create the locations and spaces for all kinds of personalities, extroverts, introverts, open, or not so open, who need very orderly kind of place. All right, so very quickly, Act 3, okay. So who cares? Well, I hope you guys care, because a lot of the problems we are facing is not type of problems that each of us can solve individually. We need really the collective action. Interestingly, the worst climate affected area, Miami, I think has a serious problem because they don't seem to tackle this long-term issue. And this was very interesting. The Financial Times writer, Simon Cooper, wrote, the essential problem is Miami's short-term is transient soul. Few Miamians feel a stake in its distant future. There are no permanent inhabitants in Miami, suggesting that in order for us to solve collective citywide issues, we need somebody, key members who live there permanently. So actually, we did this study way before the Simon Cooper's article, because I was worried about the residential mobility. Mobility is great for individual, but maybe not so great for the community at large. First, let me introduce my buddy, Alex Rothman. He was a fellow assistant professor back in 2000. And being assistant professor, Alex and I had a terrible parking garage far, far, far away from the psychology department. And this is Minnesota, people, like you don't want to walk in December. So I always go to Alex's office around 4 o'clock. Alex, do you want to walk to the garage with me? And then he usually say yes. And he was at the time driving this old Civic. And one day I noticed that his Civic had this license plate, which I've never seen before. And this was critical habitat license plate. So I asked Alex, what is this? Oh, Shige, you pay annual registration fee. And yes, if you pay $35 extra, you get this critical habitat license plate. And guess what? That $35 go directly to the preservation fund for the natural habitats of state of Minnesota. You should join. And I said, yeah. But I was just thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing behavioral indicator of pro-community action. So immediately I wrote to DMB. How can I get the list of people who buy this? A lot of negotiations, and after $500 of processing fee or bribe or whatever you call it, I get this list of people, name is hidden, but the street address is there. So then I was able to calculate essentially for each zip code, how many people purchased this license plate. And census already has the number of vehicle registered, so we can calculate the percentage of a vehicle with the critical habitat. So the long story short, that's what I did to see if there is association. So residential mobility is 5-year residential mobility from census, and the y-axis is a percentage of a vehicle with the critical habitat license plate. And as you can see, there is a minus 0.34 correlation. So the more residentially mobile the zip code area, the central part of the Minneapolis and so forth, the very, very few people have the critical habitat. On the other hand, more stable part of the residentially stable part of the Minnesota, they much more likely to purchase critical habitat license. And with statistical control for the political orientation, it turned out the conservatives and liberals are equally likely to buy this because the conservative people in Minnesota like to hunt and they care about the critical habitat as well as the liberal. But anyway, we control for a lot of things, and this association still remains the same. But this is only the zip code within the Minneapolis St. Paul city area. So we wanted to see if these differences exist across the United States. And we couldn't quite find the index or a behavior that could be sort of comparable across the city. And one day I was at the baseball game and I realized, oh, what about the baseball attendance? Because in some places, regardless of the team performance, people show up, which is an unconditional community support, which is great. Whereas there are some stadiums where like once teams start going down, nobody shows up. That's the fair weather fans and very conditional support of community team. And perhaps those places are not gonna sacrifice themselves, right? So we looked at the entire 2003 seasons of each of the Major League Baseball team, looking at the winning percentage coming into each of the home game, and y-axis is the number of attendees, official number. Arizona and Atlanta, you see clear positive correlation. When the team is doing well, people show up. Interesting happens when you look at the Pittsburgh. Wait a minute, that's a negative correlation. And Philadelphia, negative correlation. So this up there is a conditional support. This down here is the unconditional community support. So next, just plot the size of correlation as function of 5-year residential mobility. And as you noticed, Miami was the most conditional of all. The attendance was almost perfectly conditional to the team performance, whereas Chicago Cubs, Pittsburgh, Yankees, Philadelphia, Boston, much less so.
Do you have the White Sox?
Yeah, so White Sox is unfortunately, and you see that now, right? White Sox is terrible. I went there last year, this year. So when I published this paper, my Japanese collaborator, Keiko Oishi, immediately emailed me, hey, Oishi-san, why don't we look at the Japanese team? So we looked at the Japanese team and then we replicated this. So 2009, in Japan, to the residentially mobile places, the home game attendance is more contingent upon team performance. So we love this paper, but at the same time, social psychologists always demand experiments. So we did the lab experiments where we created the residentially mobile group versus not. So how we did is like invite 12 to 16 people in the room like this, and then break into 4-person group and send it to the separate. In the stable condition, we had 4 different group tasks. So in a stable group, once you assign, you're doing 4 different tasks together. In the mobile condition, you assign the first group, and then you do first group, and then we scramble, and then form the new group for the second task, scramble again, third task, scramble again for the fourth task. So random assignment. But the fourth task is always trivia pursuit task. And we give bunch of trivia and then say, whoever answer most questions correctly will get $10 Amazon coupon. Okay, so we created the situations where helping struggling others is not advantageous at all. But we inserted one confederate or our research assistant who played dumb. So she or he is instructed to, like, oh my gosh, the longest river in the world, what the heck? Then just go on to the next questions, and it's like talking to himself or herself, but we videotape so that we know who offered help. Okay, so what we found is that essentially those who are randomly assigned into a mobile group, they offer less to other members. And also residentially mobile group, the people felt less strong identification with the group, obviously, because group just scramble all the time, whereas in a stable condition, they did the 4 tasks together, so they feel like they belong to the group. And the stronger identification with the group, the more likely that they helped. So we sort of unpacked one way that why residential mobility might erode the pro-community action, so the sense of identification with. Okay, so we are out of time, I think. So Act 3, who cares? I think it is important to have some kind of residential stability as well, the stable members who can invest in the future. All right, so Act 1 was about upward social mobility, and I talked about the walkability as a key component. Act 2, to belong and be oneself. I think that the fit is important. If you don't feel like you belong there, you're much more likely to try to transfer out of college, try to get a different job, or move to different parts of city or states. And in that sense, it's really important to know who you are and what you love. And from the city's perspective, you really want to cater to very different kinds of individuals and make sure there are space for different kinds of people. Okay, and for cares, as I said, just stability is important. Okay, so that's it. So thank you so much. We have 3 minutes.
Question?
Yes.
I guess regarding a conclusion, I mean, do you think it's better for every city to offer a bunch of options, or could it be better for some cities to be, really specialized for client spaces and birds and others?
Yeah. I think that in order to win the future residents, I think you have to have certain specialization that I think that Austin, Texas, for instance, became really popular, not just the IT job, but I think it's a street, music scenes and so forth. So I think for a city, you want to have something special, but at the same time, within park or within some big building, you want to make sure there's a public sort of very easy to interact kind of space, as well as a small sort of nook as well. So I think you can really think about multiple level of the tiny space to neighborhood to the city to state and so forth. But good successful city or park and so forth, I think do have that like cater toward everybody, although you might emphasize one thing.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. So I was particularly interested in the project that you spoke about where like a city can make you more open.
Mhm.
And it seems like what you showed was that there was perhaps selection, right? Like let more open people just live in cities and towards the outskirts, they perhaps are less open. And so I was curious if you've also looked at this, but over time, right? Like in a cohort, because ultimately what we would be interested is in the power of cities to make people open.
Yeah,
And so you would be interested in like me living in the suburbs and then I live for a year, 6 months.
Yeah.
Even the question of how long is an interesting one.
Yeah.
And then you see my openness afterwards. And so
Yeah.
I was curious if you've also done some work along that line.
I love to do it whenever there's a new museums, open up. I want to do the before and after, whether that actually the residents' openness and so forth went up or not. So maybe there's somebody who is here have a connection with the new museum, galleries, concert venues, whatever, and before and after. I think that would be really, really cool to. I mean, my manipulation was obviously just bringing kids to the wooded area, this kind of about 20 minutes. So that's a minimum geography effect. So I think that if you do it long term, enough exposure, maybe that will happen. I think the longitudinal study would be amazing. Yeah.
I think thank you for presenting so much stuff. So I'm sorry if I lost track exactly where my question was. I think this is the last study in Act 1, which was a currently ongoing,
Oh, okay.
currently ongoing
Yeah,
study
yeah.
about the 100 largest cities
Yes.
in
that's
the
right.
US. And you said you were looking at pro-social behavior how are you doing that with such not videotaping them while they
No,
play
so
trivia
unfortunately, this is a survey self-report.
together? Okay.
And we use the American Community Survey questions, the same question they ask. So
Are there questions there about
like voting? Do you talk to your neighbors about the political issues?
Okay.
That type of
Okay.
stuff. Yes.
Can you argue that walkability promotes, promotes residential movement or?
So the walkability and the residential mobility issue. So in terms of the New York City, there is no strong correlations, but
When it comes to London per se, or
Hmm.
Minneapolis. Or
yeah.
Would
So
it be that like, if
right.
there's less walkability and more stability, then
yeah. I think the suburb tend to have a higher residential mobility in particular, which is not at all walkable. So there might be systematic, variations there as well. But yeah, we haven't really found a clean answer. And then this is a type of thing, like depending on the level of analysis, the answers would be very different. But I think those are important issues that like we have to think about walkability combination with the income inequalities and police violence and various other things, because it's not just that walkability will do this. It has to come with the favorable other cohorts to have the positive impact. Yes.
A city or
Yeah.
communities in your city, have you looked at like experienced things with people from low walkability neighborhood intersections, right?
Yeah.
And how if there's a change once they're exposed to areas with high walkability factors, is there an impact to their social mobility?
Yeah, so we are trying to do the data collection in Minneapolis and Atlanta because they had a new train coming in and their walkability increased. So I tried to get all the yearbook from a high school nearby and then try to get the LinkedIn and where they are. But Minneapolis, for instance, too many Olsons and Andersons. I just sort of like gave up that points, but I think we can do the precise sort of the mapping of the new line, in Atlanta here, in LA, same thing, the new line split up. So we are thinking about doing that and see if that actually helped before and after cohort. But it's not been, it's been very difficult actually.
Let's thank Shige for sending us out and